So Lars and I have written papers on this. Okay, and then I'll just conclude with this. Why not learn your way out of fear of model misspecification? And there's kind of two reasons. The kind of model misspecification that Lars and I have, you can learn your way out of eventually if you live long enough. But with finite data sets, it'll always be there. So, and the question is, how do you learn when you don't have a single model? And there's a whole, you have to go back to the foundation. You have to rework the foundation of statistics to make progress on this. And I'm just going to conclude. So I'm a little sensitive about being an older gentleman, and people think I can't do equations, but I got some equations for you. I got a bunch of equations. Actually, this one's really beautiful. This is a statistical version of Murphy's Law. But anyway, I'll just stop there. That's good. Okay.
Sargent, I'm just wondering that this Minimax problem, is it solved by a social planner? And are you then price supporting it somehow at the end of the day, or just confused about that? Or are this solved by all the agents or a representative agent?
So beautiful. Okay, so if you have a if you have an economy where it's legitimate to think that the welfare theorems apply, then you actually can solve with a planner. And so Lars and I have worked that out. And we actually use that to do asset pricing in a representative agent economy. If you have an economy where things are screwed up, like there's taxes and stuff like that, you have to use other methods. That's the answer. But there is, the separating hyperplane. There's a version of that does work. And
yeah, on the lack of the precautionary savings that you presented, how can we help policymakers? How can we help policymakers to make decisions under uncertainty? How this concept could contribute in this direction?
Okay, so Lars and I have this thing. We have a paper entitled 4 Types of Ambiguity. There's a famous book in English called 7 Types of Ambiguity in literary criticism. Lars and I only got to 4, but we could get to 7. And the whole thing is where are the doubts placed? So here's an example of one of our types. The agents inside of the model don't doubt the model, but the government does. So now what we're going to do is we solve so-called Ramsey problems, dynamic Ramsey problems, where the government, it's related to the previous question, the government is finding the best competitive equilibrium, taking into account that it doesn't trust the model. So it twists, it does a min-max at that stage. The other side of it, so we can flip that. The government trusts, this is taxonomic, but this is how we learn about the problems. We say the government completely trusts the model, but it knows that the private agents don't trust the model. And now, when you solve these Ramsey problems, the government's actually choosing the best competitive equilibrium. And it's choosing it in light of the fact that it knows that agents' beliefs about probabilities are entering into Arrow-Debreu prices. And it's manipulating that. It's actually ending up manipulating people's beliefs because it understands how their beliefs are distorted. Those are routes. So a bunch of belief manipulation. That's heresy to a rational expectations guy, right? But it comes in here as an equilibrium phenomenon.
Okay, we'll take some questions from the other rooms because people are sitting. Abhirup and Devashish, are there any questions from your room? From your rooms?
I had a question more from a decision theoretic perspective. So you work with the Gilboa-Schmeidler model. which was obviously the first big model in this area. But there have been a bunch of other models in the ambiguity literature, and part of the reasons those models have come up is precisely because, kind of the evidence that Machina, for instance, comes up with in his 50-51 example and examples of that nature. So what's special about Gilboa-Schmeidler, or even the Ellsberg paradox, is that their ambiguity, when you go across prospects, ambiguity goes in one direction. So there's just ambiguity of the prospects which is changing. As opposed to that, you could think of situations where you go from, say, one policy to the other. By the risk dimension, one policy might look better, and whereas by the ambiguity dimension, the other policy might look better. So in terms of your modeling, in terms of understanding macroeconomic questions, do you, have you kind of thought about those ambiguity risk kind of trade-off problems which you cannot model in the Gilboa-Schmeidler approach?
Okay, so we haven't thought that much about it. We've taken a stand on it because the way Lars and I do this is we use these so-called we use what amounts to either so Massimo Marinacci and some co-authors describe what they've axiomatized what Lars and I do. There's things that we call multiplier preferences and constraint preferences. Our constraint preferences are a very special case of Gilboa-Schmeidler's multiple priors model. Our multiplier preferences are a special case of what those guys call variational utility models of ambiguity. So our things are very special, and Lars and I are ruthless. We stick as close as possible to robust control literature. And our motivation is different. We talk to the people who develop axioms, but axioms aren't our main concern.
Okay, one more question from the rooms, if they're there? Or?
No more questions.
Okay, so who had their hand up here? Yeah.
So I think you probably explained it, I just didn't understand. So in face of uncertainty about true model, what is the role played by the nature?
Okay, the way I'm just going to, I'll probably explain it even worse than I did the first time. So, so there's people who are a lot better theorists than I am here. The way I think about, here's the way I think about it. If I thought either about Savage's theory of Savage's axioms and expected utility, there's nothing about nature. It's all personal, and it's all my generalized behavior that satisfies these axioms, which are just generalizations about my behavior. I have a representation that I can back out with this personal probability distribution. Whether or not the word truth isn't used. It's just a mathematical exercise that you can explain my behavior by these. It's as if I have this probability distribution, and you know, nature's not involved. If I look at Aaron DeBrew, that's just a completely artificial mathematical thing where there's a bunch of guys with preferences. There's random events that can occur, but they just have preferences over these possible random things. Get a competitive equilibrium. You could think of them in some ways. You could think, if you combine that with Savage, you could think of these different people having different beliefs, but you never have to say what nature is. It's only when you start taking a model like that to the data, and people like Arrow, they weren't antagonistic to doing it, but they didn't do it. So if you take it to the data, actually, it's a beautiful question. If you take it to the data, you're going to have to confront what's the difference between the beliefs that are implicit in the model and what's actually generating the data, and that's where John Muth comes in. He says, I don't want to have any difference at all. I want to have the data generating mechanism be the same as what's coming out of the model. I want to restrict things really. So he closed that gap like that. You know, if you look all over anything applied public finance, applied applied game theory, like, that's just widely used. And you can see how you got backed into that, because you have this gap. So, so with Lars and me, since now we say there were these guys, they have a common model in the theory, but they doubt it. I have to make a separate and somewhat embarrassing thing. Say, well, which of these models actually generates the data if you're actually going to do empirical work? And what's true is that when Lars and I do the maximum likelihood or stuff, the econometrician does not doubt that approximating model. And he doesn't doubt his description of the other people's doubts. I don't know how to... See, my friend Chris Sim said a long time ago, I should listen to him. He talked about the wilderness of bounded rationality, or the wilderness of leaving rational expectations. And you can kind of see how you go into this wilderness once you leave Muth and you're an applied worker. You face these decisions. But so most of the time when you go into the wilderness, as Chris mentioned, you get eaten alive. And that'll probably happen this time. But sure, it's fun. And an econometrician just gets slammed by misspecification, just comes and hits you in the face. And then, so the circle is that Mu's two-sided. He has this equilibrium concept, but he also says the agents in the model should be kind of like us. And now that goes two ways. So that's the instincts and the intuition that attract Lars and me. But lots of intuitions just lead you in most intuitions and instincts get you in a lot of trouble. The whole point of civilization is to restrict instincts. But so I don't know.
Last question.
So you could do some more robustness checks, right? You could allow the model the econometrician uses to be any of the models on the boundary of the ball.
Yeah.
So have you done that?
No. No, we have done the following. So Lars told me this was one of the most painful and terrible things he ever worked on. We did we have some papers on robust filtering. So, and this is a thing where people, how do you learn? So we have how do you learn when you don't trust the model? So we actually go back and revisit the classic either Kalman filter or nonlinear filtering problem. Not in an equilibrium context, just single agent context. So we have papers on that, where we do that. And then this is a way to make enemies. Like my friends Larry Epstein and Martin Schneider say that Lars and I are out of our minds, the way we do it. And we don't think they're out of their minds. So that it doesn't, we think, but we do it differently than they do. So here's what's at issue. Here's what Larry and Martin say. Okay, you have multiple priors. Here's how you update. You have every prior, every period. If you're a programmer, think about that, where you have a continuum of priors, every prior, every period. That's not what Lars and I do, because we're ruthless. What we say is, you take the approximating model, you update the prior after that, and then after you update it, you say you don't trust it. So we update only one prior at a time, but we doubt it every time. And the question is, are there conditions under which you can do that? This filtering thing naturally leads you into questions about time consistency. They come and hit you in the face. I think they're really interesting issues. In some ways, they're kind of, well, they make you appreciate ever more what the Bayesian unique prior model is doing for you. But because it just anyway, that's my answer to you. And you see why it's a partial answer, because a nonlinear filtering problem is very close. That is an estimation problem. That's a recursive estimation problem. So we've thought about doing something like that, and it's what you should do, right? You should, like, if the econometrician's doubting your model, you should be presenting your evidence in a way that respects those doubts and reveals them to people. And Lars and I haven't done that.
Okay, one very last quick question.
Somewhat speculative. If I think of science, it's something where you never know the truth. That's science, as far as I understood from prior readings. So whenever you're doing science, you have to allow for something not known, not being certain. So when you presented your definition of model, that's what hit me most was, once you know this model and everybody shares it, there is this space for science. So your collection of models on which you are thinking about, that probably gave the opening for, like, actually we are doing science, and there are different ways of doing it. You do it in one way, and the prior work, whatever else existed, is yet another way of doing science. I call it speculative just to hear from you. Am I thinking in the right line?
To me, you are. So there's actually, so when you do maximum likelihood or Bayesian estimation, there's a big pretense of knowing the truth. And actually, I'll tell you one way I got into this. So I had this lifelong conversation with Chris Sims. So Chris Sims' original work he just wrote some beautiful papers in the early 70s. We were talking about the consequences of estimating a model when you had the wrong model. And he got some beautiful characterizations. Actually rediscovered something famous. He got some beautiful characterization of the probability limits of models that you're estimating, and it's wrong. So the probability limits that you're estimating are going to be functions of completely something else. And he had this advice about how you can craft filtering of data to try to minimize your errors when you were. So he was very much in the line of that. But so Lars and I were exposed to that, didn't know what to do with it, and then started picking it up when we did this robustness stuff. But now Chris says, you should just be a Bayesian and pretend you know the truth from the beginning. So he's switched sides, but I can't tell whether he's just teasing me or. But this discussion comes up. Or if you prove a law of large numbers or thing, just think about what you're doing. You're saying something if the data were, anyway, that's it. But I think about what you said all the time.